Researchers are now saying that by the year 2100, our bodies will deform due to our excessive use of technology. That our ankles would be swollen and full of veins. Our hands would come to resemble clogs. Our backs and necks will be bent, and our eyes would appear lifeless. We will spend most of our time indoors, talking to our social robot or operating our smart home through voice and sound commands. We may be in the same spatial environment as our colleagues and friends, but we would be completely detached from our surrounding and the people within it. How would this affect on the way we learn, think, create, and experience the world? So much of what we accomplish in the world is based on our embodied cognition. It is the way we learn how to quantify data from a young age. It is also widely explored in the world of visual arts, like in this painting by Michelangelo, The Creation of Eden, where through the use of the composition and gestures, it expresses the symbolic relation between the physical and metaphysical world. And of course, embodied cognition isn't just at our fingertips. This image is from a research conducted by Kevin Lynch, an urbanist and architect, who studied through the use of mind maps how users experience and remember the city throughout their interaction with it throughout the day. And he defined recognizing parameters that most users identify as ones that they perceive the city through, like recognize landmarks, paths, and nodes. Barbara Tversky also studies this relation between the body in motion and its relation to its surrounding. And in a recent book, Mind in Motion, Our Action Shapes Thought, she argues that when we use gestures to process information, we process it in a much more effective way. And she also argues that quite instinctively, when we use our body, we use it well to express intent, affection or disaffection. For example, when we move towards something to express an interest in it, or move away from something to express frightened or disgust. Oskar Schlemmer, a Bauhaus artist, also studied this idea of the body in motion in relation to its surrounding. He focused on the body in motion on the stage. And in an article he wrote, When an Art Figure, he defined 4 archetypes of the way the human body moves in relation to its surrounding. And he also designed a set of costumes based on his thesis. I'm Margarita Erenst. I'm a multidisciplinary designer with experience designing for visual, gestural, and wearable forms of communication. Because of the fleeting nature of movement, I am interested in how we can use immersive technologies in order to document and capture movement. And once it is captured, I'm interested in how we can harvest it to teach others those movements, or manipulate it, or mix it, or use it in different ways when we use technology. And I'm really interested in what the use of wearables would mean for the future of the way we interact with our surrounding and the people within it. Transparent Borders is a dance performance performed by the Sharon Vazana dance group. The dance deals with this idea of the internal battle that we all have within us when we try to keep our individualism, and at the same time we're always interested in affinity and support from our surrounding. And when I designed the costumes, when I came early on to the rehearsal site, so I was interested in how we can explore this idea through the costumes. So how could I create a wearable art that could blur the line between the two bodies while they were on stage? Usually when we're designing for wearability, we start by charting the fashion sketches on a 2-dimensional diagram that shows the body from the front back and side view. And this is a very effective system when we're thinking about fashion design or mass production of garments, because it creates a unifying principles that all the people in the production chain could follow and produce accordingly. But I feel that when we're talking about designing for stage in general, or when we're designing for dance in particular, this system is missing a key ingredient in the narrative of the story, in what we need the costumes to do and tell. Because in dance, just like in real life, our body is never static. It is always in motion, and we never just stand still on stage unless to express a specific idea, or at the end of the show when the dancer bows in front of the audience. So in my process, I started by taking still and video images of the dance in the rehearsal site from all the perspectives the audience was going to see the show. And then back at my studio, I took all these images and I created quick sketches that show all the compositions within the dance, where the two dancers were in physical contact with one another. And then I gave each dancer identifying color, and I marked the intersecting sections between the two dancers. Then I took all these sketches and I adapted them to the regular fashion sketches that show the design from the front and the back side view. In order to design the textile maps themselves, so to design where how the fabrics were going to look, I worked on both garments simultaneously, and I kept overlapping the designs one on top of the other to make sure that all the intersecting colors I wanted to be perceived when the dancers were on stage could also be aligned correctly already when I was about to digitally print the designs. And when we're designing for stage, one of the challenges is that when we're in the design process, we always look at the materials from very close view, we touch them. And this is very misleading, because when the dance is performed live, so the color of the stage and the lighting in the performance hall, so it creates a very different look for the colors and everything that looks quite good or vivid when we look at it from very close view must be scaled up to be viewed well from the far. And we only really get to validate our designs and see if the way we try to communicate information through the textiles was really working and effective only the day of the show. So, and we do it by listening to what the audience is saying, and of course by what the reviewers are writing after the show. So Oli Linkinski from the Jerusalem Post wrote after he saw the performance. As the two-headed creature begins to move and rise, the optical illusion continues. It is impossible to differ where one body ends and the next begins. Body-wearing movement is part of my master thesis project. And here I wanted to take this idea of visualizing motion to the next phase. So here I wanted not only to visualize the motion, but also to embed it within it. So I imagined this scenario when I could just give you the garment and you can wear it. And once you wear it, you'll know exactly what movements you can perform and how to perform them. I come from a family where most of the men were either born with or developed some sort of motor disability throughout the years. And I noticed what a difference and the impact it made when they were able to perform physiotherapy or sports every day, and the challenges it rose when they were forced to go to physiotherapy treatment outside the house, or that when they had to remember how to perform all the movements home alone. And I'm also a big fan of the Avengers series and this idea of having a smart garment that you could just wear on you and it would immediately empower you is an idea I'm fascinated by. So in many of my projects, I like to speculate how emerging technologies would affect the way we use our wearables and what would it mean for the way we communicate with our surrounding. So in Bodies Wearing Movement, I took this idea and I created a series of garments that have embedded rails within them that were laser cut and 3D printed. And there are hinges that go into those rails, and then users can just put their hand inside those hinges and they can operate the garment in different ways. And in order to decide what movements I was going to embed within the garments and where should I embed them, I created a set of overalls made of a simple knitted white fabric, and I worked with dancers, Pilates instructors, choreographers, and family members. And I gave each of those testers or users markers, and each time a different instruction. So, for example, I asked them to, while wearing the garment and holding the marker, to draw the shortest or the longest, the slowest or the fastest path they could on top of the garment. And then I started to look what patterns emerge from those movements. So here you can see a series of charts made by one of the users, and you can see that she stayed mostly in the frontal side of the garment, and also that she used mostly the top area from the torso to the neckline. And then I took all these maps and I transformed them to a series of basic rail models that I could manipulate and adjust in different ways on different places on top of the garments, and I created and fabricated the garments themselves. So the final collection included 4 garments, which each with a different movement series embedded inside. The first, both of them were documented in 2 video art sessions. So the first video showed an experimental physiotherapy session, which was developed together with a Pilates instructor. And the second video shows the 3 garments, which were videotaped in a video art in a jam session together with a dancer. So here I have designed 3 garments. The first garment shows short movements, like movements we do every day, like putting our hand into a pocket, for example. And the second shows long and repetitive movements. And the third showed round and spiral movements. NeatNet is another project I created when I'm looking into the future of how we can capture movement and for what this could be good for. So it's a project it's a side project I've been developing together with Nadav Sharabi, a close friend of mine. And here I was interested in exploring how can we document knitting gestures and translate them into digital patterns on a connected app by turning knitting needles into smart needles. So when I started this project, I conducted interviews and conducted online search. And for my research, I found that most of the knitters were actually having a hard time scaling their level of expertise within knitting. And this was strange for me because the knitting itself is only based on 3 basic gestures that have to be done repeatedly, that are fairly easy to learn. And yet most of users were only able to knit simple objects, square ones, like scarves and blankets that also takes just a few hours to knit, while very few are able to move on to more advanced objects like fully fashioned garments and sweaters. And I was wondering why that was. So I found 3 ways that typically users learn how to knit or follow knitting instructions. And there are 3 ways the instructions are structured. So the first way is like in the image you see here, through a visual diagram that shows all the stitches within a garment. So here you see the frontal side of a sweater, and only this side has more than 10,000 stitches that has to be knitted repeatedly, one after the other, row after row. And while knitting, the user has to count and make sure that she remembers to increase the number of stitches at certain areas like the sleeve line, or decrease the number of stitches as she gets to the neckline. And also she has to remember not to make any mistake while she's knitting, because if she misses a count or creates the wrong stitch type at the specific time, then she needs to unravel what she's done and redo it again. Another way the instructions were structured was through textual instructions, which look quite a bit like recipes. And here each row represents a pattern, and all those patterns have to be repeated over and over again in order to create the full structure of the fabric. And here the user has to count again and again and make sure that she doesn't miss any step. And the third way to learn how to knit or to follow an instruction is through a video tutorial. So in this case, the user has to watch the video, then stop, perform a few steps by herself. Then, while holding the needles and the yarns, press play again and continue watching, and then doing this back and forth again and again. And when I looked at the other side of knitting, like the creatives that were creating their own samples, for example, or knitters who wanted to customize the design in terms of color or in terms of size, then I found similar multitasking problems. So when I look at knitting, I think it's all about data encoding, like from the way the gestures themselves are structured, to the knitting, the way the charts are structured with the symbols that represent each stitch, to the way those gestures are manifested and fabricated within the textile samples themselves. And when we started working towards mapping the data and capturing it and trying to make the algorithm to analyze it, so we quite quickly understood we'll have to think about it both the micro and macro scale. So when we think about the micro scale, we had to analyze the gestures at any given point in time, and we had to understand the path the hands and needles were going through in each knit. We also had to understand the rhythm the knitter was knitting in, but also we had to understand whether she was holding the yarn very tightly or quite loosely. We found the different materials, like wool, for example, that is a little bit more rigid, was more stiff and took a bit longer, while other materials like lycra, which is a little bit more stretchy, so the knitting was much more loose and sometimes almost fell off the needle. We also found that the diameter of the yarn and the diameter of the needles themselves had an effect on the pace, on the rhythm of the knitting. But we also quite quickly learned that we would have to think about this scenario contextually as we mapped the data. For instance, we found that if the knitter was leaning forward or backward, was she knitting on the go, like on the bus or on the train, for example, when she knew she only had limited amount of time to finish a row? Or was she knitting at home when she was relaxed? If she was knitting in a bright light or in a dark room? All these factors had an effect of the data we gathered. So then when we started analyzing the data, we could take all these parameters and look at them on the charts themselves and understand like different areas within the knit that were problematic, that we had to change and adapt the algorithm to recognize them better, like at the beginning of a knitting sessions when the hands weren't that warm, for example, or at the beginning of or end of a row, or when the knitter was switching between colored yarns. And this process also helped us think about like the future of this project and what else could be done with this motion capture technology for knitting. For example, we were thinking, what could this do for rehabilitation, for example? Or how we could use this technology for play and learn products, for learning how to knit, but also to learn about material structures, or geometry, for example, or math, and how we can take this idea forward to more experimental cultural heritage projects, for example, that could give it could be a way to document and preserve a knowledge of skilled knitters from various cultures. And I'd like to end with a quote delivered by Bill Gates on March 2019. Until now, we have always had to adapt to the limits of technology and conform the way we work with computers to a set of arbitrary conventions and procedures. With natural user interfaces, computing devices will adapt to our needs and preferences for the first time, and humans will begin to use technology in whatever way is most comfortable and natural for us. Thank you.